I've actually been here before. And thinking about it, maybe I was here before. So if anybody hasn't seen Kim, can you just tell us like who you are and like what you do? I mean, you can be as brief or as long-winded as you want.
Nice.
Yeah, I want to hear from you, and everybody wants to hear from you. So.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you back, and I thoroughly enjoy you as a person and as a spiritual being.
Yeah.
Right now, I work as a healer, and I use a lot of different energetic modalities for that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Reiki master teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I teach different kinds of energy healing,
Right.
Using mostly in frequency and amplitude. I also do hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really effective way of working with an individual in the West.
Right.
We don't so much have a tradition of really deep meditation in the West.
Right.
So hypnosis gets us there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in training with my clients, that allows them to drop in really deep into their consciousness.
Right.
And they can go into states of consciousness known as the Alaya Vinyaya, which is the Akashic Records or the eighth consciousness. Also the ninth consciousness, which
Right.
is the Buddha nature or Christ consciousness. It's the area free of karma. So when we get into that space, which you did, right, in your hypnosis session, you really can see that it's very different than the duality we live within that has a karmic resonance.
Right.
So I work with clients basically for energy healers. We're moving energy. You know,
Okay.
people have blocks from the past, typically.
Yeah.
And we're moving them out so they can move into that ninth consciousness.
Now, I just wonder, their past, but also could it be like their family's past? Is that also part of it too?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we have different, you can think about reality as occupying a fractal sense, a
Right.
fractal nature.
Right.
And so the individual themselves has a personality, they have a soul.
Right.
And then that soul is connected in various ways to other souls. And those other souls have relationships to your soul, right? So when we think about even Jungian archetypes, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the work Jung did, we see that there's this identification with an archetype, right?
Yeah.
So something that's very big.
Right.
Lots of people experience an archetype, right? And we can also experience familial relationships. So we might have alcoholism, for example, in our family, or addiction.
Right.
And so our work is tied to our familial work, because when we heal ourselves, and the indigenous tribes talk about this all the time,
Right.
we're healing, when we heal ourselves at the individual level, we're healing 7 generations in the future and 7
Wow.
generations in the past, which gives, honestly, somebody who is pretty selfless a motivation to continue to work and grow, right? Because they're doing it for their family, right?
Okay. It's like QHHT.
Yeah,
right?
so quantum healing hypnosis technique.
Right. And quantum, for people who might not, quantum is basically like there's quantum entanglement.
Exactly.
Right? Physicists, they're like 16 known dimensions, but there's a lot more, right, than they know. They're thinking that everything's connected, right? So like, quantumly speaking, like, because I've been in this space, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm connected to it somehow, right? And then they say, like, if I touch something, right? I don't know.
Right.
If I touch something, then I'm connected to it. I'm also connected to the energy that was connected to it, right?
That's right.
Okay. So then, I guess one thing that I'm thinking is then, you were talking about, people that are selfless, like when they operate in like a mode to like want to be healed. Has it always been a trigger point for them, or has it just been something that's been innate, or like, Or is it just like it just depends on the person? Like, how do you usually get people here and then, to say, hey, I need help?
Well, usually it's word of mouth, because hypnosis requires a tremendous degree of trust, right? If you're opening your mind up to someone else, for us to go in there and, you're exposing yourself and you're very vulnerable.
Right.
So you have to have a level of trust and rapport with the client for them to relax enough that you can help them in that way, right? It's unlike the physical, because the physical, let's just say you hurt your hand, you're taken by ambulance to a hospital, you're bleeding, right? Some people might actually resist help, but most people want a physical help, right? And because they can see what's happening.
Right.
When you're in someone's mind stream, when you're entrained with their mind, they can't really see what's happening, right? So you have to be a very trustworthy person to even for that person to feel comfortable with you.
Okay.
So, so we'd like to I like to work with individuals who are ready to work with me, right? So sometimes an individual might be going through a crisis, right?
Right.
And they're desperate to see you. They really want to be feeling better. They're either mentally hurting, physically, emotionally, or spiritually hurting.
Right.
And so those clients present in a certain way, right? Where they're really inflamed, right?
Yeah, they're on fire.
They're literally on fire, right? On fire, because even when I do, and I do this biofield imaging, and I'll just say for a moment what that is. So we take a picture and we run it through a process where the biophotons that are captured on the digital image are exposed using a software program.
Yeah.
And then that software program takes those biophotons and it translates them into the frequencies and the amplitudes of the biophotons that are present on the body.
Gotcha.
Okay? So we can see high amplitudes when we talk about a wave, right? A wave can look like this, right? Has low amplitude. Or it can look like this, high amplitude, right? And so all of that energy really can be explained and understood in terms of a wave function. And that wave function, when it's high like this, if it's a positive, like a positive frequency, so in the higher territories of the heart or the throat or the third eye or the crown chakra, talking the subtle energy system now, they when we have a high amplitude experience of these higher chakras, the heart, for example, you're in love, you're like, it's very powerful, but it's positive, right?
Right.
When we have a high amplitude experience, again, of the heart, it could be of the heart too, but it's a breakup or it's something that's negative, right? And then it's devastating.
Right.
So when we look at those negatives with high amplitude waves, what we tend to see is really screaming hot frequencies, right? And it's all red in the person's biofield.
Okay.
So we try to focus on that area, getting into what's the history there. Why did it get this way?
Okay. Trauma.
Right? Trauma. Could be something that just happened, or it could be something that happened in their childhood.
Okay.
Or actually it could be something that happened in a past life.
Yeah, their past life, and then also generationally speaking, like stuff that's happened in their DNA line, I guess, because they're quantumly connected to their generation.
That's right.
We were talking on the phone about, I guess, the Mandela effect a little bit, and we're also talking, like you brought up something about like people that, I guess, want to heal 7 generations back and 7 ahead. Like, most people don't think about that, but I think most of the time, like when they come to you, they're like, okay, crisis situation, we fix it.
Right.
I've been running into people a lot lately that are sensing that they're here for a reason. Like there's a lot going on in the world that they might be able to change or fix or be a part of, like the healing, of creation,
Right.
You have a choice. But like if you make this choice to start to heal, then does that like kick you off from another timeline? Can you talk about like maybe, I mean, and just in your experience, like your own experience too, like you went to India, right? And then all of a sudden, like, things just picked up for you. So, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, just in your own experience or what you've seen, like, I guess, how can people, like, start to, like, look for the signs or just pay attention to, like, what's going on? And
I mean, that's the key, right, is the awareness of it. Because with awareness, you can make a choice, right? When we don't have awareness, it's choiceless. We're going through habit, right? So that habit is a programming in our DNA, in our system, right? And it takes more energy to get out of a habit than to stay in it, right?
Yep.
What I've seen with different kinds of timeline shifts is that, you know, it depends on the level of awareness. So if someone is really aware that, okay, these are things that are happening and I'm seeing them as synchronicities, not as someone's out to get me, right?
Yeah.
I'm seeing these as opportunities, and even when things are going and things are getting canceled, for example, or a trip gets canceled, for example.
Right.
You can look at that in one of two different ways. You can say, maybe that's for my benefit, because something would have happened on that trip which wouldn't have supported the work I'm doing, right? And the direction that in this present moment I feel most aligned with. Where we get stuck is when things come up, things get canceled, something apparently is negative, right? That we don't see the opportunity and the benefit that it's presenting to us, because that's a harder view. And it's through experience and awareness that when you see enough of those happening and start understanding, oh, this is how I didn't, you know, I needed to be here in August, so I didn't take that trip because this important thing is happening in August, right? So I do think with timelines, when we lay them out and we think about possibilities and probability curves, as we're approaching 100% probability happening, right? That has a lot of factors involved. It has your own motivation, it has your own level of awareness. It has, have you let go of all the fear that you're holding on to?
That's a big one.
Right? And so are you able to choose in love, you know, for this? And the more that we choose in love only, and we start letting go of the fear choices, the more things start to become very obviously a timeline and a synchronicity, right? So these timelines start to unfold, and you can kind of see them like Neo in the Matrix, you know, in the movie, right? You can start to see how the whole Matrix is unfolding before you, right? Now it gets a little tricky, because when when you start to see this, you can still have some fear deep down, right? You still have some fear-based programs that you're working through. And certainly through that whole movie, Neo's coming into this awareness. It's not an instantaneous thing,
away,
right? There's different tests that he's passing along the way.
It's like, oh, the bullet passed me. Oh, now I can dodge bullets.
And so then I can be brave. I can move towards love in the next choice. And it's because I know I have this skill set.
Can I jump over this building? I don't know. He has to go to the edge and, you know. Then he jumps.
Then he jumps. But then at the end, you know, he's taking on Smith. And he's done a lot of work to get to that point, right? Through the course of the movies, he's had a lot of tests. He's had to choose. And then each of our lives is like that too. We're needing to choose courageously in love. You know, we're warrior poets, right?
Wow. That's strong.
Right?
Yeah. Dealing with like fear and love and like all those things, like how does like one sort of start to differentiate between like what's the ego and like what's your higher self, you know, the creator, and you have divinity, you have divine angels, you know, you have the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, you know, you have a lot of things that are at play. You have Earth, right? And then some people are like the universe. When you start to think about it, it feels like things are helping you. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of help. You know, you have a lot of help. Meeting you, you know what I'm saying? Like I've gotten so much help, you know, just even a couple calls here and there, you know. How do you break away from like fear-based programming, for instance?
Well, for a time, right, we can rely on a higher being, right, that we don't personally identify with, right? So we grow up, we're thinking about ourselves in terms of like God, right? Like we're looking to God to help us.
Right.
We're looking to Jesus. We're looking whoever your higher being is, that either a pantheon of them or an individual one, right? And then at one point, it becomes very clear that you're not separate really from God.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You start to understand that fundamentally something within you is really connected with God in a way that you can never be severed from God, right? And that starts to open things up where there's not this God outside of you, there's a God inside of you and outside of you, that it's both simultaneously. It's both and. So then things stop becoming just confined to a dualistic us versus them system, right? And then you're like, oh, God created me and I am a creator as well, right? And then you start to take responsibility for the things you create around you, right? And then you see, well, I'm also being helped by the creator in that process. And then that becomes more quantum, right? Because then it becomes less linear, like me and God, and then it becomes us, right? And then you can start thinking about things in terms of an and connector rather than an or connector. So in terms of the higher self, this idea of that there is an aspect of you that is just a higher being, right? And nobody's higher self, it's very hard to connect to the higher self aspect of us that is God, right? It's sort of, I don't even know that I've ever been there.
Yeah, that's hard to think. You think about your higher self as like a better part of yourself, but still like God's like over here talking to your higher self, then disseminating information to you.
Right. So, and that's where those intermediaries, like the angelic beings, the wisdom beings that I talked about in the first podcast, their frequency is enough that they're not going to blast us out, Yeah. When our consciousness actually gets into that oneness state with God, it's so far beyond concept that you can't come back from that and actually say anything about it, because it's so far beyond conceptualization that we have no words for that experience, right? The higher self is kind of like our direct pipeline in the order of a higher frequency above us. And so at some point in our experience, human experience, we start to understand that we have a higher self, right? And then because, when I saw my higher self, and the Buddhists would call the higher self the Buddha nature. So at the time, I would think about the higher self in terms of Buddha nature. And I saw my own Buddha nature, and I saw it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my entire life, right?
Was it your image, likeness, or just pure light, or?
Yeah, I would have thought it would have been pure light. But actually, and at the time I had red hair. My whole family on both sides had red hair. And this being was a vision, and she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. She was human. She had blonde hair. And I didn't recognize any part of her as me. So it was really surprising to me that I could have that inside of me somewhere, right? So years later, I shaved my head, and my hair grew back this color. So then I was like, oh, I guess my higher self is coming through more.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Because I've seen pictures of you, you're a redhead in these pictures.
Yeah, and you look at my whole family, they're all redheads, so.
Wow, hold on for a second. Okay, so, yeah. Right. So dimensionally something happened.
Something happened. It was very surprising to me too, because actually when I had done meditation and practice, within this concept of a Buddha nature, I really didn't think it would have a form. I didn't think it would have an appearance. I didn't think it would be a human.
Right.
But when my hair grew back and it was this other color, and having seen her and having like it be the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life,
Right.
then I started to like, oh, I wonder if I can be her, you know?
Yeah.
So then once you open up those possibilities, then you start seeing more of
Wow.
your options, you know?
Did you look at yourself different in the mirror? You're like, you know, like, OS changes when, like, I mean, how was that?
I mean, the biggest fundamental thing is you start to love yourself fully. Like you understand your relationship to these higher beings.
Wow.
That you're not this, you know, you're not really what you've been told you are.
A peon, or working to be accepted by people, to then finally arrive at, I got you.
And so then you're like, well, if that's in the lineage, if my higher self is in the lineage of God, of Christ consciousness, which nobody, I'll tell you, in Catholicism, at least the Catholicism I grew up in, would ever tell you that you could be like Christ.
He says, though, in the scripture, he says, be like me.
So he's telling you.
Right. And he's also saying in the scripture, you'll do these things and much more. Right? So on earth, he walked through walls.
Right.
And he ascended, and he was transfigured before 3 of his favorites. I mean, there's a lot of things that happened with Jesus. Even in his resurrection, 40 people are walking around in the city after he came up. There's 40 people that are immortal. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's something there. It's just, it blows my mind to think, like, all the weird things that happen in that book, Luke, and then also in Acts that we just sort of forget, you know? It's sort of like Ezekiel, Enoch, Philip, right? The Ethiopian eunuch gets baptized, and then the rock takes him to another city. It's time travel, right?
Yeah.
It's weird.
Well, and I mean, I've traveled, and we've talked about the Merkaba, right? Building your Merkaba, and traveling in that, and you look back at historical accounts of other travelers using a Merkaba.
Right. It's in the Bible. The Merkaba is in the Bible.
Right. And so you can see, okay, I went to the same place that this person is writing about 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago.
Wow.
Right. And you start to put it together like, okay, there's a lot more happening here.
Yeah.
And if I can love myself and trust myself, I think that's the key. Can I trust myself more than I trust this authoritarian regime?
Or system.
Yeah. Can I trust myself and my own experience more than I trust them?
Right.
And it takes a lot of courage to step outside and start to trust yourself with these incredible, fantastical experiences, right? So I think that this is the test. This is the test that you do have the wisdom, you do have the compassion to be able to step into these experiences and be grounded in them, right? And also to, bring your highest self to them as well. So once you start believing and trusting that you have within you the ability to have a higher self, to be that Buddha nature, right? To be outside of the world of karma, right? Like Christ was. Yeah. You start making choices with that possibility in mind, right? So when things like so you had asked me about like difficult challenges in my life, right? So I worked for 30 years as an engineer, an environmental engineer.
Okay.
And mediator.
Would have never thought that.
Right.
You have a personality and you can talk and you're not an introvert, you know?
Yeah. So when I was guided to leave that career, they'll tell you one thing when you're in it, you know, like, but you have to trust that what your work is higher than that.
Yeah,
you know?
the 3D existence.
Yeah, the 3D world. You really have to trust your higher self because everyone in that other world is telling you something different. So you have to be courageous. That is that warrior aspect, right? Because you know something that they don't know about what we're all made of, right? Who we all come from, where we all came from. And that empowers you, right? And you can't look back. You can't actually go back to it.
Yeah.
You can never go back. Once you understand and experience your own state of that divine nature that you were made from and that you are, and that's inherent in your lineage, in the human lineage, there's no going back, you know? So you're not going to listen to, and you become very sensitive to frequency, right? You become sensitive to lower vibrations like dishonesty, lies, and jealousy, all these lower vibrations that are really present in that 3D reality. You just can't actually tolerate them anymore, right? Your body can't, your mind can't, and it kind of, you get cast out in a way, you know. Now I think where we're at as a people, as humanity, you know, we're at this crossroads right now of deciding as the collective, you know, in each moment that we experience, we can all make a choice around, are we going to step into the light, or do we like it in the dark? You know, do we like to stay in the dark?
Ooh,
right?
That's a big thing. Disclosure. Is happening. On many levels. I was going to ask you, I'm going to be nosy, but the Buddha, like when you got into your Christocentric, your Buddha nature, like, was that out when you went to India, or did something happen before where you're like, okay, like your eyes were open, you're like, okay, I can't sit in this job any longer. Like, you know, did all that happen beforehand, and then you were like kind of coming back after vacation, you're like, gosh, what am I doing? Like, how'd that happen?
Well, it happened. So in 2014, when I met those wisdom beings and I had that Christ consciousness experience, coming back, I really did try to work within my world, in my professional world. And, you know, I worked there for another probably 6 years, 7 years.
Okay.
Now, my higher self did tell me I should have left in 2014. But I had kids I was supporting, and you know, I was making choices out of, you know, maybe comfort, or not comfort, but trying to work within the system, I'll say.
It's a logical move, though.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at money. The only people I've ever seen make money come out of a fish's mouth is Jesus, right?
Right.
However, I used to see, I think Buddhists and a couple people, like they say, like you can live without, right? And so they just operate in knowing, okay, like I'm not worried where my food's gonna come from, where I'm gonna sleep. And that's a far out idea. And so it's hard. I mean, because we've been conditioned for a long time to think like you gotta pay the bills. And you as a woman, it might be different, but me as a man, I'm conditioned to say, I have to step up to the plate. You know what I'm saying? I have to meet these conditions or I'm not a real man. You know what I'm saying? So, but you said, so 7 years, and then they grew up, or just like, you just were like, enough is enough, or?
You know, I think it was, and we were talking about these different kinds of portals that arise, right? So there's individual portals, you know, that take you to a very different place, right? Even in the physical, right? And where I was at was very different from where the people in charge were. And you kind of get spit out. Now I was spit out in a positive way for myself, but there definitely wasn't any going back, right?
Gotcha.
And which liberated me and made me free, basically, of that existence, of that really slave system that the corporate model presents to everyone. You know, there's no going back to it, because you understand the nature of what a corporation is.
It's a beast.
And you don't blame a beast, you know, for wanting to.
That's what they do.
That's what they do. So you find a new way, you know, and you begin again. You start over.
I think we were talking about timelines too, in the synchronicities. So is that where, you know, you start to see doors open? You know what I'm saying? Like, you just, people say something, or like, you know, it's like, oh, let me start to read that. Like, when you go back to your timeline, your scroll, you're like, that actually was going to happen the way it was going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, I was going to see it a certain way. For me personally, you know, looking at my podcast, you can tell, like, it had a progression. Like, I was very, I mean, I have an MDiv, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not shunning the Bible, but there was a moment where I was like, I wanted to read the Book of Enoch, and I had friends that would tell me, like, don't touch it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I've had a big hit on some of my relationships because I read the Vedic text.
Right.
Or I read Thoth, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I read that, and some people are like, that's really weird, you know what I'm saying? I'm just, well, I just want to know, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, I had a lot of doors open up because of that. I was hearing, like, build your Merkaba. I was hearing, like, you need to learn to fly. You know what I'm saying? I was hearing, like, you know, you're going to be able to traverse time and space.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I was hearing these things.
Right.
And then I'm worshiping, you know, to normal Christian music, but it was like for hours, you know what I'm saying? And these Christians are actually more far out, weird than a lot of the other, you know, so still, you know, I have people in my life, you know, so you worship for an hour, you know, and you listening to God, you feel like there's angels in the room. I'm like, there's angels right here, right now.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I'm like, that's all real. And so I just stopped explaining it to people.
Yeah.
I just started going, so I still was in church, but I still was noticing, like, in my own quiet times, things were happening that are outside of my control. This is not a coincidence.
Right.
And my business started to, like, flourish too.
Right.
Because I was seeing things in the spirit realm.
Yeah.
I was seeing gold come down. I was seeing angels pouring gold into a river, and me just watching it. And God's like saying, like, there's gonna be favor. You know what I'm saying? But I feel like a lot of awesome things happen to prepare me for, like, a little bit of, like, okay, turbulence.
Yes.
And so when there's turbulence, I've always held on to, like, everything I've been shown, because I'm like, how can I deny that those things happen and they're real? And now in this present stage of life, it's like, there's opposition and turbulence, but then there's also, like, names, numbers, happen chance, people texting me randomly, or, you know, things I've been thinking, you're vocalizing and telling me. I guess, how do people then start to make sure they're putting the pieces together? Like, is there another stage for me to get to where I'm like, okay, do I trust myself enough?
Well, there's always new stages, right?
Yeah.
That is one law. There is always change, right? There's change. And so how does it look like? Do I love myself enough? Yeah, I think when I look at these biofield images, right? When I look at them, in the past I've looked at my own, and now I work with a lot of clients. And so everything we can understand at just an energetic base, right? From a neutral standpoint, that there is no bad and there is no good, right? Okay. We can just say this is a low frequency and this is a high frequency. And the low frequencies, I feel terrible when I see them in the biofields, right? I feel bad when I talk to my client, I see a low frequency pool, and I say, what's that about? And they're like, I feel so terrible, you know? And then you can start to drill down, or if you have, you know, intuition, you can feel into that and say, okay, where does this come from? This seems like there might have been some abuse, or there's some kind of, you know, trauma associated with, were you in a war, or, right? And so you can start to break up that low frequency, and as soon as we break it up, it starts to naturally come up. It starts to rise up, so that frequency that was a red, you know, represented as a red, will come up to a beautiful green or a blue, and the feeling that's associated with that allows for that person to feel love now, because they were blocked. So I think you and I talked about you know, the two things I see universally, it seems universally, with men and women, right? Men in the West, and I'm just talking about here in the U.S., although I've filled people in Europe as well, and it does seem to apply there, is that men's heart chakras are very blocked. Okay, they're very blocked. And women's throat chakras are very blocked, right? Okay. So we complement each other in terms of what are the things we're working on. Men are working on feeling, you know. They've been trained to shut down their feelings, right? In a very deep way. Like you think about when you were growing up, probably you weren't celebrated when you cried, right? Right. It wasn't like, yes, you know.
I have a friend now, she's like, it's okay to cry.
That's right. But you need permission.
Right.
Because that heart chakra was blocked. You know, you were taught to block it, right? You physically were taught to block it. And women, when they're not born into power here.
And they're voiceless.
And they have no voice. So these are just the challenges that we're working as we evolve, right? So men are really focused on, how do I feel again? And let me tell you, there's nothing more satisfying for me as working with a man who's opening up his heart for the first time, right? Because I'm witnessing it. They've been shut down their whole life, and now they're able to feel, which is an incredible experience to feel. It's one of the benefits of being human, right? Is to be able to feel deeply, right? And to feel love in that way, right?
Yeah. Other beings can't feel actually like we can.
Right. And even higher beings, they say, this is, you know, we don't have the same experience. We're dreaming you, you know, we're dreaming you into being. And so we can have this experience of ourselves. What is this feeling state that you get to experience? So we're working on releasing those low frequencies that have accumulated from lack of use in the heart, men. And women have to open their throats. They have to speak up out of love and not fear, right? When you think about encounters with women, you know, even from them not wanting to talk to them screaming, it's the same throat chakra block. Right. You know, a screaming woman isn't about an open throat. It's about fear, right? Not always, right? Sometimes we need to speak up because we need to be heard. So there's always two sides to the story, but what we need to focus on is how do we liberate this block, right? So there's a number of different ways to do that, but it always involves the heart, you know, it always involves love.
Right. I know we talked the other day, we were talking about energy, reiki, and the chakras, right? So the heart chakra, throat chakra.
Right.
Is that as simple as just like meditating with music and like, okay, is this the right frequency? Is the heart chakra? Or is it also like, okay, like, how do I feel right now? I don't know how I feel. Like journaling, grounding, or like, how does a man do that? Because I'm probably one of the only guys that actually journal. You know what I'm saying? Right. And when I'm journaling to God. You know what I'm saying? But I'm a rare cat. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So how do I even like continue to progress? Okay, heal my heart chakra. You know, or my heart. You know. All of
those are amazing approaches. Okay. As long as you're in alignment with the practice. So a lot of times we have this innate. Signal that is pulling us to our, I think one of the things you pointed out is that we have specific gifts, right? We have specific gifts that we are uniquely positioned in this life to be able to express. So you might be, you know, you have a voice of, a writer or someone who is doing work with sound. And so you might be drawn to putting ideas within, laying them out. I've heard this said before that for visual artists, they're decorating this space, and for musical artists, they're decorating time.
Wow.
Right? Those two different dimensions,
That's
right?
deep.
So
Time
you
and
might
space.
you might have an inclination to decorate time because you want to write in a journal, right? So you're placing ideas within a temporal context of this happened, then that happened, and this happened, then that happened, right? And then another person might have the dimension of space where they want to connect with their higher self or God through an idea of space, and they want to decorate the space, and they want to understand their own divine nature through decorating of that space, that dimension of space. But I guess as we expand our awareness and our consciousness, especially with the opening of portals of different dimensions, really, and the ways to use them, we can find new ways of even removing those blocks of opening more and more, right? I mean, who like 20 years ago, if you had told me I'd be traveling in a Merkaba to different places, I really wouldn't have believed you, you know?
Can't even conceptualize.
Couldn't even, yeah, you're like, what are you even talking about? So when things, it's, once you start removing barriers, the inherent nature of God will already come in because it's already present. So you just have to really experience it and then say, is that aspect of God something that I feel in alignment with? And let me pursue that, because that will always take you into a higher frequency.